Hi everyone and welcome. We're outside in my yard today taking a quick check-in on my outdoor worm bin. And it's kind of a warm day today. It's going to be even a warmer day tomorrow. It's the beginning now of December, getting close to the middle of December actually, and we've already had a number of very cold days. And in preparation for those cold days, I've gone ahead and I've put this cardboard liner inside of the container. This is actually a trash pail, and I've been composting in here with worms for a number of months now. And the addition of this cardboard was intended to provide the bin with a little bit of insulation and protection from the cold weather that's on its way. And we've already had a couple really cold, freezing days, and I was just becoming a little bit concerned that maybe the cold weather is starting to affect the worm population in here. So I've not checked in on it since maybe a couple weeks now, since these pumpkins were added and since the insulation was placed in here. If we look around, you can see a couple worms cruising around. There's a couple worms over here and one right there. And some interesting mold growing on this pumpkin. It looks like gray hairs almost. I'm going to see if I can remove this pumpkin to see if I could get a glimpse of what's happening right beneath it. In the past, it's always been right beneath the pumpkin where the most activity was to be seen. Because prior to these two pumpkins here, well, actually prior to this pumpkin here, it was this pumpkin right beneath it that was placed in here originally. So this bin has been composting pumpkin for quite a while now. Not seeing a huge number of worms though. I'm starting to wonder where all the worms went. This container does have a fair number of holes on the bottom of it, and I guess that's what was giving me peace of mind to say that, hey, you know, if the bin starts to get really cold out here with this wintry weather on its way, then the worms always have the option to burrow down to the very bottom and find some of the holes that are present in the bottom of the container, and work their way out of the container down into the soil where, you know, hopefully they'll be safe from freezing temperatures. I'm beginning to wonder if that's what might have happened to my worm population here, because other than these couple worms that we're seeing here in this older pumpkin, maybe a couple we saw underneath it, not really seeing too many worms. And that's never been the case in this bin. This bin, I've always seen a fair number of worms cruising around. But now, I guess another thing to mention is that in addition to this cardboard that was placed around the edges, I've also kind of tried to, let's see if we can get a look at what's going on here. I tried to also go down underneath where this food is and laid out a whole bunch of leaves. So these leaves were right below this partially composted material right here and beneath the pumpkins themselves. And that was really the original material before I came in here and tried to insulate things. So I'm just curious if maybe the worms have burrowed down into that lower layer of material and have not really exited the container, but just tried to get down lower where maybe it's a bit warmer, more comfortable. And I mean, right away it's already possible to see a few worms hanging out over here. Let's see if we can just get the camera a little bit closer to see what's happening here. Let's dig down into the material a bit and see if we can see some more worms. So yeah, there's worms hanging out down in here. Definitely more than we see within the pumpkin itself. Some of these worms are really tiny too. Itsy bitsy little baby worms. Look like they must have just hatched not long ago. That's always a good sign. It's always a sign that the worms are comfortable in their environment and they're reproducing and multiplying. But my main concern with this container is that at some point the worms might sense that it's becoming a bit too cold and try to work their way to shelter. This is great. This topic even came up not long ago. Somebody even asked about the cork that I was running in my previous worm bins. And, you know, the question was, hey, whatever became of the cork? Because we were checking in on the status of this cork repeatedly in my previous worm bins where the cork was, I guess, placed in there to begin composting. And that's pretty interesting. I think that's the tail of a worm right there. So it seems like there must be a crack in this material enough that the worm was able to make their way down into there. Am I imagining? That is a worm. That's awesome. I never would have imagined that the cork could get infiltrated by a worm and that the worm would have any interest in trying to consume this cork. But there it is. That's our proof right there that the cork is of interest to the worm. He burrowed right down into the little crevice that he found within the crack of the cork. And oh, how do you like that? Was he on there the whole time? I didn't even notice him. It's another little tiny worm. Unless that's the baby worm that was stuck to my finger earlier when we were checking him out. So that's just interesting. I didn't really expect to be seeing this cork very much in the future, at least not until the springtime, when we would probably get more down into the results of this bin. But here it is, the cork. The cork from the previous incarnation of this bin. So whatever, I'll just return it and we'll take our chances going forward in the future. See if we ever encounter it again, spot it again in the future. So yeah, I mean, for now, I've got to say that things are looking pretty good. You know, I'm not finding the worms up in the upper layers because I can imagine that it's probably a little bit chillier up higher here where there's more exposure to the air that kind of makes its way into the container. I can imagine how getting down closer to the bottom of the bin, which is up against the soil, and the container itself is right up against the house. So I can imagine that the earth right next to the house is probably somewhat warmer than the earth just out in the garden somewhere. So it's probably a little bit more comfortable for them to be down low because the temperature is probably a little bit warmer, a little bit higher, a little bit more tolerable. So at least we're not seeing a major exodus of worms, because that was my main concern in here. I was worried that maybe we would start poking around in here and then we would just find that, you know, all the worms have exited through the bottom because of the cold. But luckily that's not happening here. But I am curious just to check on one other thing here before we move on. I'm just curious to see what's happening right beneath the bin. So I'm just gonna tip it over here. And here you can see we're up against the side of the house. And, you know, I think what we're seeing here is pretty normal too. It's what I've been checking in on regularly, is just taking a peek underneath the bin itself to see what I can see. And what I normally see is worms hanging out down underneath. Because you know how worms are, they just like to explore and cruise around, and I guess they probably just sort of shoot off in any old direction and, you know, come to rest at a spot where they find something that's appealing to them. So I think that's probably all we're seeing here is worms that have kind of made their way through the bin down to the lower levels and have actually made their way out through some of these openings in the bottom of the bin, because the bin is full of cracks and holes at the bottom, and that's probably partially why we're seeing some worms that have exited the container, which is fine by me. I actually feel better knowing that there's holes like this in the container, so that if things really do become, you know, very cold out here, and for whatever reason I just sort of end up neglecting the bin and not tending to the needs of these worms, then the worms have a means of escaping and getting to safety and not being potentially frozen out here into a big block of ice. So all right, let's gently put this back down where it was and try to get this settled back down where it was. So like I said, I've been trying to keep it right up against the house, as you can see. And in addition to that, I've got like this piece of trash bag surrounding it on one side. And I also had a tarp covering the whole setup, so that was intending to also provide a little bit of insulation. So for now, I think we're safe. I think things are looking okay in here. You know, even though this food that was placed in on top, this pumpkin was meant to hopefully draw worms up to the top of the surface in order to come after the fresh food, I think what they're really drawn to is the warmth down at the bottom levels that's closer to the earth, because it's been chilly, you know. I guess we'll see, you know, because tomorrow it's supposed to get as high as 60 degrees. Kind of a rainy front is moving through our area right now. In fact, I got to get inside because I'm starting to feel the raindrops coming down, and the radar map showed a whole bunch of rain on its way. So I want to get this thing covered up, protected before I head back in. So let's leave it at that. That's where things stand with my outside worm bin. So yeah, if you've been following along and you're interested in these sort of videos and you're enjoying this one, then please give the video a like. I always really appreciate that, and also consider becoming a subscriber to the channel. That's really appreciated as well. All right, let me get this thing put away. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.